This is the beginning of a mini-series that I'm going to be doing on alchemy. And I'm going to be using some rather old sources, and I will have the sources listed in the description box below. What is alchemy? Alchemy is generally understood to have been that art whose end was the transmutation of the so-called base metals into gold by means of something called the Philosopher's Stone. Alchemy was both a philosophy and an experimental science. Later on, those alchemists who interpreted the writings of ancient alchemists created the science of chemistry. The great majority of alchemists were engaged in problems and experiments of a physical nature. However, the genuine alchemists were pure mystics and concerned with problems of a spiritual nature. Alchemy had its origins in the attempt to apply, in a certain manner, the principles of mysticism to the things of the physical plane. The transcendental theory of alchemy was based on symbolism. It was concerned with man's soul. Its object was the perfection of the soul, not perfection or creation of a material substance. Alchemy was, in truth, a branch of mysticism focused upon the seeking of spiritual truths, whereas the alchemists who attempted to turn physical base metals into gold were fixated upon an outcome based in the material world. The mystic alchemists taught the true transmutation was the transformation of man's soul into spiritual gold, by the elimination of evil and the development of good. This spiritual transmutation may be described as the new birth or union with the divine. According to Pattison Muir, alchemy aimed at giving experimental proof of a certain theory of the whole system of nature, including humanity. The practical culmination of the alchemical quest presented a threefold aspect. The alchemists sought the stone of wisdom, for by gaining that, they can gain the control of wealth. They sought the universal panacea, for that would give them the power of enjoying wealth and life. They sought the soul of the world, for thereby they could hold communion with spiritual existences and enjoy the fruition of spiritual life. The most famous axiom of every alchemist was, "What is above is as that which is below, and what is below is as that which is above." This saying meant the human being is the world in miniature. As is the microcosm, so is the macrocosm. To know oneself is to know all the world. This expresses the basic idea of alchemy. The alchemists believed in a very real sense in the essential unity of the cosmos. They held there was a correspondence that existed between all things spiritual and all things physical, and that the same laws operated in each of these realms. The wise sage saw heaven reflected in nature, and pursued the art of alchemy not for the sake of gold or silver, but for the love of knowledge which it reveals. Alchemy was sometimes referred to as the science of the soul of all things. According to the author Pattison Muir, writing in 1902, the alchemists were sure that the intention of nature regarding metals was that they should become gold, for gold was considered to be the most perfect metal, and nature, they said, evidently strains after perfection. The alchemists found that metals were worn away, eaten through, broken, and finally caused to disappear by many acidic and acrid liquids, which he prepared from mineral substances. But gold resisted the attacks of these liquids. It was not changed by heat, nor was it affected by sulfur, a substance which changed limpid running mercury into an inert black solid. Hence, gold was more perfect in the alchemical scale than any other metal. Since gold was considered to be the most perfect metal, it was self-evident to the alchemical mind that nature must form gold slowly in the earth, and must transmute gradually the inferior metals into gold. The alchemist constructed his ordered scheme of nature on the basis of supposedly universality of life. For him, everything lived, and the life of things was threefold. the alchemist thought he recognized the manifestation of life in the form or body of a thing, in its soul, and in its spirit. Things might differ much in appearance, size, taste, smell, and other outward properties, and yet be intimately related, because, according to the alchemist, they were produced from the same principles, they were animated by the same soul. Things might resemble one another closely in their outward properties and yet differ widely in essential features, because according to the alchemists, they were formed from different elements. In their spiritual properties, they were unlike. According to H. Stanley Redgrove, mystical philosophers used the following terms. Body is the outward manifestation and form, soul is the individual spirit, and spirit is the universal soul in all men. And likewise, in all metals, there is the body or outward form and properties, metalline soul or spirit, and finally, the all-pervading essence of all metals. The theory of physical alchemy was the forerunner of modern experimental science. The physical alchemists held that all metals are composed of two elementary principles, sulfur and mercury, in different proportions and degrees of purity. They did not understand these terms, mercury and sulfur, to indicate actual substances, however, as we do today, but rather properties. Sulfur was generally regarded as the principle of combustion and also of color, and was said to be present on account of the fact that most metals are changed into earthy substances by the aid of fire. Mercury was attributed such properties as fusibility, malleability, and luster. Later in the history of alchemy, the mercury-sulfur theory was extended by the addition of a third elementary principle, salt. Of course, as in the case of philosophical sulfur and mercury, this term did not mean common table salt. Instead, salt was the name given to a supposed basic principle in the metals, a principle of fixity and solidification, conferring the property of resistance to fire. Alchemists combined these theories with Aristotle's theory of the elements, air, fire, earth, and water. These four elements were said to act incessantly upon one another. Thus, fire acts on air and produces sulfur, air acts on water and produces mercury, water acts on earth and produces salt. Earth becomes the womb of these three principles, and the metals grow in its womb. It is the earth's life-giving spirit that nourishes them. In addition, the growth of each metal was believed to be under the influence of the heavenly bodies, the planets. They regarded gold as the most perfect metal and silver being more perfect than the rest. Through all the metals and from one seed, nature works continuously up to gold. In other words, all other metals are gold in the making and have the potential of becoming gold. Nature seeks a gradual attainment of perfection. The alchemists sought to assist nature in this goal. The alchemists taught that the true transformation in alchemical language, the transmutation of one thing into another, could be effected only by spiritual means acting on the spirit of the thing, because the transmutation consisted essentially in raising the substance to its highest perfection, whereof it was capable. The result of this spiritual action might become apparent in the material form, then, of the substance. In attempting to apply such vague conceptions as these, the alchemy and alchemists were obliged to use the language which had been developed for the expression of human emotions and desires, not only for the explanation of the facts it observed, but also for the bare recital of these facts. The language of alchemy is therefore very highly mystical. They used a symbolic language. They sought to conceal the mysteries of heaven from vulgar and profane eyes. The language of the alchemists was, therefore, rich in such expressions as these. The elements are to be so conjoined that the nobler and fuller life may be produced. Or, our arcanum is gold, exalted to the highest degree of perfection, to which the combined action of nature and art can develop it. To the alchemist, lead represented the most base of the metals, and symbolically, the sinful man. Gold, on the other hand, represented the regenerate man, spiritual beauty, and the overcoming of temptation and evil. Author Muir tells us that the alchemists were very fond of using the names of animals as symbols of certain mineral substances, and of representing operations in the laboratory by what may be called animal allegories. The yellow lion was the alchemical symbol of yellow sulfides. The red lion was synonymous with cinnabar, and the green lion meant salts of iron and of copper. Black sulfides were called eagles and sometimes crows. When black sulfide of mercury is strongly heated, a red sublimate is obtained, which has the same composition as the black compound. If the temperature is not kept very high, but little of the red sulfide is produced, the alchemist directed to urge the fire, else the black crows will go back to the nest. The salamander was called the king of animals because it was supposed that he lived and delighted in fire. Keeping a strong fire alight under a salamander was sometimes compared to the purification of gold by heating it. The alchemist employed many signs or shorthand expressions in place of writing the names of substances. The central quest of alchemy was the quest of an undefined and undefinable something wherein was supposed to contain all the powers and potencies of life and whatever makes life worth living. The names given to this mystical something were as many as the properties which were assigned to it. It was called the one thing, the essence, the philosopher's stone, the stone of wisdom, the heavenly balm, the divine water, the virgin water, the carbuncle of the sun, the old dragon, the lion, the basilisk, the phoenix, and many other names were given to it. What brought about the transformation of man was this philosopher's stone, a species of gold itself that was pure and purer than the purest. Understood in the mystical sense, this means that the regeneration of man can only be achieved through goodness. The philosopher's stone is the true medicine that produces a permanent transmutation leading to the perfection of man. It was thought to consist of philosophical sulfur and mercury combined so as to constitute a perfect unity, and frequently likened to the conjunction of the sexes in marriage. Though most alchemists were chiefly engaged with the carrying out of the alchemical theory on the physical plane, with the attempt to transmute the base metals into noble ones, the true mystics sought the glorious result of the transmutation of man's soul into spiritual gold. Transcendental alchemists taught that in man there is a union of three parts. These are body, soul, and spirit. Metals also may be said to have a body, a soul, and a spirit. There is a specific bodily or material form belonging to each metal. There is a metalline soul characteristics of this or that class of metals. There is a spirit or inner immaterial potency, which is the very essence of all metals. However, with regard to man, the soul and spirit of man are clogged by his body. If the spiritual nature is to become the dominating partner, the body must be mortified. Some ascetic alchemists thought that the development of man's soul is only fully possible with the mortification of the body, and that in order for man to reach union with the divine, there had to be an abandonment of the individual will and an abasement of the soul before the spirit. So the alchemists taught that for the achievement of the magnum opus on the physical plane, the metals had to be stripped of their outward properties in order to develop the essence within. The killing of the nature of material things was brought about by a process called putrefaction and decay. And more about alchemy and the alchemists in the next video.